The following video contains spoilers. We suggest watching the episodes alone in the dark.
Happy Halloween, Wolfpack. We're back, and we're closing out this month of horror with the ultimate special Halloween-themed episodes of the hit TV show R.L. Stine's The Haunting Hour, the two-part story arc, The Pumpkinheads, and Return of the Pumpkinheads. We've tackled psychological horror, paranoia horror, body horror, and emotional horror, but now we have a simple monster horror story. These two are the only Halloween-based episodes of the show, and since they're both an overarching story connected with each other, we might as well judge these episodes as one whole story, like the writers seem to have planned. But wait a second, didn't R.L. Stine already have a Halloween special with pumpkin demons abducting children on the nightmarish holiday? Why yes, he did, but this two-parter is much different from that classic Goosebumps tale in numerous ways. While both stories have pumpkin demons in them, the plots are very different in regards to our villain's motivation, or lack thereof in the case of Return of the Pumpkinheads. I'd also like to point out that the first Pumpkinheads episode is another adaptation of an original short story from R.L. Stine's novel The Nightmare Hour. However, we won't be delving too much into that, since I'm reviewing two episodes at once, and both stray off from the novel quite a lot. Sorry, Nightmare Hour fans, but you can all thank the sequel for taking this story down a notch. Now don't worry, I'm not going to stop reviewing Haunting Hour episodes after October ends, so don't feel bad if your favorite episode wasn't chosen as our Halloween special review. Does the Pumpkinhead story arc hold up as a grisly tale of suspense, or has it failed to stay memorable in our heads? Well, let's stop wasting time and find out. This is my review on the Haunting Hour story arc, The Pumpkinheads, and its sequel, The Return of the Pumpkinheads. So our episode opens up immediately establishing the dark tone with a shot of a missing child poster, obviously telling the audience that bad things have been happening around this town. Apparently, this kid was last seen on Route 12, where I guess these unseen Pumpkinheads have killed him. Yes, the Pumpkinheads. Let's go with that. We then transition from this missing child poster to this dark, creepy house covered in Halloween decorations, where it's revealed to be October 31st. Ah yes, Halloween. The night he came home. No, sadly he doesn't appear, but you'd be surprised how often this two-parter feels like a slasher movie for kids. We then meet our three main characters: Allie, the older responsible sibling, Scott, the immature adventurous teenager, and Dave, the naive child. Dave is played by Frankie Jonas, from the Jonas Brothers, because this episode came out back when the Jonas Brothers were still popular. Yet Dave does not even do anything important in the story at all, despite the fact that Frankie Jonas got credited as a major part of the episode, and he's immediately forgotten about in the sequel. What a waste of a perfectly good character. The older brother Scott is pissed off and complaining about how much Halloween sucks now, where he drops some exposition on us by informing the audience that the town is on a major lockdown and curfew laws are in place due to the events of the missing kids, meaning that all the kids have to obey the town's safety laws under fear that the child murderer would snatch up more innocent people. Wow, that's actually a pretty good idea that the adults want to protect their kids from this unseen child murder with their serious safety protocols. Too bad it'll ultimately mean nothing in the end, because the Pumpkinheads won't lose here thanks to the sequel giving away their return. So in short, Scott is angry that Halloween is ruined by the overprotective adults, since they aren't having as much fun on the holiday anymore, thanks to being banned from going outside alone at night. While I don't really have many complaints about the town's safety watch, Scott is not entirely in the wrong for wanting a better Halloween experience, giving him a good motivation for wanting excitement. However, I will point out that Scott does come across as nearly unlikable in some of his complaints.
Dad, you promised when I turned 14 that I could stay up late trick-or-treating with my friends. Unsupervised. Things change. What? Because some stupid kids disappear? And I get punished for it. This is supposed to be my night.
The mother puts the big sister Allie in charge of the others because she's going to be working late tonight at the hospital. Hey, I bet she knows Jared and Cynthia's mother. Scott is still pissed off and asks her if they can go out late tonight, but the mother denies him since she says she's only looking out for the safety of her kids. Ouch, that's really going to be unfortunate once we get to the ending. So while the kids are forced to stay home on Halloween, Dave complains about his small pumpkin not being cool enough for his big design, but Scott takes advantage of this and convinces his siblings that they should go to a mysterious pumpkin patch owned by a man named Farmer Palmer and take his bigger pumpkins for carving jack-o'-lanterns. Allie is reluctant at first, but Scott convinces her to drive them by promising that he'll leave her alone all night. So the kids arrive at the spooky pumpkin patch, where they question why Farmer Palmer has so many pumpkins around for himself instead of selling them for profit. But they make nothing of it and break in. I guess I wouldn't think nothing much of a pumpkin farmer who doesn't seem to sell his crops for profit on October either. However, we see they've parked their car on Route 12. But wait a minute, that's also the same place where those missing children vanished. Oh boy. So after the episode gives away the plot twist, the kids look around the pumpkin patch, where Scott takes an interest in a creepy barn, but a stranger watches them from afar. So like total morons, they all decide to go inside the creepy barn together, where they bump into some genuinely terrifying Pumpkinhead figures put into some painful looking poses like haunted house statues. Okay, I'll admit, all the scenes that take place in the Pumpkinhead barn are easily the scariest parts of this whole episode. I mean it, this darkly lit maze filled with pumpkin demons doing unsettling poses and looking all dead-like really makes you feel intimidated by what they are and what's going on at this place. It's by far one of the few scariest moments in this whole story arc. Good thing the sequel episode never reuses this part ever again, but why would any of us ever want to see this nightmare room on this horror show? So after crossing the Monster Museum, they notice a dark, creepy basement that goes even further into the barn, but the kids wisely decide to leave instead of risking the obvious danger. They try to steal the pumpkins and get out quickly, while Scott takes an interest in some strange crops that have bags covering them. But before he can see what those things are, they hear Farmer Palmer coming and make a break for it. Unfortunately, Scott stupidly falls into a hole. No, not that one. And Farmer Palmer catches them. Huh, anyone ever notice that Farmer Palmer looks like the Bugman from Men in Black? I guess that means the Pumpkinheads are aliens too, like in that other story. So in a very creepy scene, Palmer gropes the kid's head and says he's not ready yet, in a creepy pedo voice. Really subtle there with your main villain haunting hour. He takes Scott out of his dead body hole and tells the kids to never return, or else they'll all be sorry. Wow, that's a very reasonable action. Our main villain is giving them a chance to walk free as long as they don't come back trespassing on his home. That would be nice if we didn't already know that he's housing those creepy pumpkin demons, making him the obvious insane antagonist. So after the kids go, we get another creepy moment where Farmer Palmer starts stroking those hidden crops, calling them his babies. Points for the extra dark theme going on here, riders. It's a shame Old Man Palmer didn't use his powers for good, like his more successful brother Ray. Before the kids leave, Scott still stupidly decides to rob pumpkins from the farm and convinces his siblings that they shouldn't leave here empty-handed. Yes, good idea, stealing from the obviously unhinged psychopath who just threatened to kill you if you ever crossed him again, you clods. They jack the pumpkins, but we see that something is following them to their car. Later that day, the kids arrive home where Dave talks about the history behind jack-o'-lanterns. Well, somebody clearly saw Wolf's editorial, now available here on the Wolf Entertainment channel. Scott continues talking about how Halloween is becoming lame, but while he whines, we see that the unseen monsters found where they lived. Spooky, isn't it? However, when the kids start carving their jack-o'-lanterns, the stolen pumpkins are revealed to have worms in them. But when Scott tries to see if the second one is fresh, they find a tooth inside the pumpkin. Hey, I collect those too, right, Alice? Yes, seriously, they find a swarm of worms and a human tooth inside of the pumpkins they took from that creepy farmer. This adds in so much horror when we find out what those pumpkins really are. But for me, the scene is kind of ruined when the kids never call the police or think about how creepy all of this is. Really, Alice just tells them that the pumpkins must be rotten, and the human tooth is brushed off by her as a weird pumpkin seed. You morons are so dead. Allie tells them to trash the pumpkins and never speak of this again, but when Scott dumps their stolen pumpkins in the trash, we see that the Pumpkinheads saw everything, and they declare... Okay, putting aside the obvious plot hole that the Pumpkinheads were able to locate these kids at their house when they drove away in a speeding car on foot, I think it's stupider that the kids never report the fact that Farmer Palmer is clearly crazy and used those pumpkins with human teeth in them as evidence. But then again, Scott would just complain about how this Halloween is still so lame anyway, so who cares? So after not keeping the pumpkins as evidence of murder, ignoring the death threats against them, and never reporting on the creepy old guy groping a child's head, the kids decide to head out for Halloween, where Scott and Dave complain about how lame it is that the town is forcing them to do safety trick-or-treating by partying at their school. Oh, but don't worry, this nightmare story about a dangerous Halloween killer still has lame jokes in it for the kids.
What are you supposed to be?
I'm zombie Justin Bieber.
Ha 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 ha, because nothing says timeless classic like a dated joke about Justin Bieber. Wouldn't you agree, Jonas brother? So after they all don their costumes, the kids go to school for safe Halloween, but we see that the demons broke into their house to wait for them to come into their trap. Later that night, the kids return home and amazingly never realize that the monsters are in their house because I guess the Pumpkinheads are stealth masters, which I'm sure the sequel episode won't play up too much at all. Scott still acts like a total idiot when he asks Allie if she'd like to go back to Farmer Palmer's place for real Halloween fun, but she wisely points out what a stupid idea that is and tells them that they're staying home to watch monster movies. Hey, great idea. I hear Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns is a good choice. So Scott stays alone in the kitchen to make popcorn while Allie and Dave watch their movie marathon without him because they're jerks. However, while he waits alone, the lights suddenly go out.
Jesus, what the hell could it possibly be?
No, it turns out to be the Pumpkinheads in full view, and they abduct Scott in their sack, while naturally nobody in the other room hears the kidnapping going on. A few hours later, the siblings finally realize Scott disappeared, and find the door left wide open. I guess the Pumpkinheads have bad manners. Allie thinks Scott disobeyed her and went back to prank Farmer Palmer, so instead of calling for help, she decides to go back to the pumpkin patch to catch Scott herself, so she won't get into any trouble. Dave pleads with her not to go back, which is the only smart thing he does in this entire story, but Allie reassures him that everything is going to be just fine. Boy, she's really going to regret not listening to her little brother. They return to the obviously scary pumpkin patch, where Allie tells Dave to stay safe inside the car while she pops in and out, retrieving Scott. We then get an honestly intense, scary, and suspenseful scene where Allie explores the dark farm alone at night while a monster follows her. Allie thinks she spots Scott going back inside the barn and goes in, while we get an unnecessary scene with Dave acting like a stupid fat kid and eating a lot, instead of keeping watch to make sure his sister is safe. Oh, that Dave. But back in the scary moments, Allie looks around the creepy pumpkin barn once more, but notices that all the pumpkin figures they saw earlier aren't in their positions anymore. Things get really darker when Allie sees a pumpkin figure wearing Scott's zombie doctor costume. Wow, a dark moment where the villains outright show off their love for killing? Great nightmare fuel for everyone on this family show, right? Allie still thinks Scott is messing with her until she sees that Dr. Pumpkinhead has come to life and is ready to operate on her. Realizing that the Pumpkinheads are alive, Allie runs for her life and an intense chase scene ensues. But just in case you were interested in this sudden dark turn, the episode itself literally kills the mood a few seconds later.
I love Halloween.
Oh, that Dave! So while Allie tries escaping, she gets surrounded by the monsters, where she finally uncovers what those hidden crops really are.
Hang this picture over your baby's crib tonight. Extremely big shit.
Yes, those secret crops we saw hidden away earlier are actually human heads from all the victims Farmer Palmer and his Pumpkinheads killed for the past few years, meaning that those stolen pumpkins the kids carved earlier were sentient human heads too. Sleep well tonight, kids. Farmer Palmer shows up and tells Allie that she should have never returned because he killed all those missing kids for knowing too much about his demented interest in dark pumpkin magic. So he cut off their heads, planted them into the ground to turn into deformed pumpkins, and planted his own pumpkins onto their dead bodies so he could turn them into his monstrous children. I know, right? This family show just provided us a story about a deranged magic serial killer cutting off people's heads so he could plant his cursed pumpkins onto their corpses to form a demon army to raise as his own children. You know, for kids. Oh, and Farmer Palmer himself is revealed to also be part demon, as we see when he shows his demon claw hand while groping Scott's pumpkin head. Wait, so Farmer Palmer is a pumpkin demon too? How does that work? Does he just walk around with his hands in his pockets all the time so nobody notices his demon heritage? How did any of this whole Pumpkin Children plan even start? Was he just trying to compete with the creepy Cabbage Patch Children at the next farm? Boy, I can't wait to learn about the answers behind this awesome villain in the sequel episode. So after outing himself as a pumpkin demon, Farmer Palmer tells Allie that her brother is now a Pumpkinhead just like them, and she's next, as Allie does absolutely nothing but scream in fear like a total idiot. So after she dies horribly, we cut back to Dave, who fell asleep in the car, but we see the Pumpkinhead version of Allie has come to kill him too. Oh my gosh! This would have been a dark twist ending if the sequel didn't ruin this twist by telling us that Dave lived in the end. Yeah, I'm not kidding. The sequel episode reveals that Dave survived all of this with no explanation whatsoever. But that was the end to the first episode of the Pumpkinheads. It was super amazing, dark, suspenseful, and an all-around great episode to watch on Halloween night. I'd strongly recommend this first part for all horror fans, but sadly I cannot say the same about the sequel. Yes, if you love this episode like me, then you're really not going to enjoy the follow-up plot that continued on the story that should have ended here. So let's stop beating around the pumpkin bush and get into the second part. So the sequel, Return of the Pumpkinheads, opens up with an establishing shot of the creepy pumpkin farm, now abandoned and falling apart. It's been a couple of years since the last episode, but we're not exactly sure how long time has passed, just to make it feel creepier. Oh, and that army of Pumpkinheads you saw last episode just went poof and disappeared. Well, all except for 3 of them. So sadly, no Dr. Pumpkinhead anymore. Then, all quality of this story arc immediately goes downhill when we meet, our main characters. Yes, Farmer Palmer, the main villain of the first part, and sole survivor Dave are not in this episode at all. Instead, those interesting characters are completely replaced by this annoying family of colossal idiots. Meet our new and improved characters, a whiny, bratty teenage daughter named Karen, an obnoxious jerk-jock son named Zach, and their 2 dumb-to-live parents. They're all going to die. Yeah, I won't lie, I won't drag their fates out. You can literally take one look at all these people and correctly assume that they're all doomed. These characters are the most awful, cliched stereotypes you'll ever have to suffer through. All these children do is complain, complain, and complain about how much moving into this farmhouse sucks. Moving into this farmhouse sucks. It gets grating real fast. I mean it. 90% of their dialogue is all about these 2 brats complaining about how stupid this farm is, to the point where you actually want to see them die horribly. In fact, you could simply replace all their dialogue with this. I'm not trying to sound like a know-it-all, but when I first saw this episode, I told my brother Wolf that I knew these characters were going to die. I knew that these characters were all doomed from the start based off of the way they acted alone. All the characters in this story are total cliches. Karen is a bratty, popular girl, making her even more annoying than Stephanie. Zach is an angsty jerk-jock who comes across as Jared 2.0. The mother is that overly annoying optimist who constantly tries looking on the bright side of things. And of course, we have the ultimate cliche with the father, who, you guessed it, is a total bumbling idiot who makes dumb decisions all the time.
That's our father, he's an idiot.
Everyone here is more like a cliched horror movie sequel character that you'd find in the most awful generic horror movie sequels. I could not care any less for these people. They have absolutely nothing going on, and just to make them all the more worse, they costed us the story of Farmer Palmer and Dave. 2 deep characters that had so much potential are thrown away for these annoying morons that you find in a bad horror movie. But I think I know why Dave never came back to the show. It's because the Jonas Brothers weren't cool anymore, and the Haunting Hour doesn't want to have dated celebrities guest starring on their show. They only want timeless classics, like jokes about Justin Bieber sucking. So yeah, in short, these characters suck, and the Pumpkinhead story arc has now gone from a cool original horror story into a generic bad horror movie sequel. Back in the plot, the kids whine for what feels like forever about how much this farm sucks because the writers think we have the patience for them, and they find some of Farmer Palmer's old creepy junk where they actually show us that Palmer kept a pet pumpkin in a bird cage. What, was a pumpkin dog too much responsibility? This leads to these bratty kids whining even more about how much this farm sucks, while the stupid parents try to convince them that this is a great change in their lives if they just look on the bright side of life. And ironically, we cut to the Pumpkinheads outside, clenching their fists in anger at the family moving in on their turf. And as you can guess it, they plot their...
revenge!
Question? How did somebody sell off Farmer Palmer's old farm if the Pumpkinheads are still living there and react violently to trespassers moving in on them? You could try to argue that the Pumpkinheads might want people to come so they can rebuild their army, but that raises so many questions on what their motive or purpose is. Oh, by the way, you see all these scenes where the Pumpkinheads look like they're ready to kill these idiots? It actually takes them forever to finally start the return like the episode promised us. I'd be just as pissed like the Pumpkinheads are right now, since they get demoted to lesser characters in their own sequel. So after we get a cameo from the Scarecrow, Karen finds some creepy baby cribs in the attic. Wait, so Farmer Palmer literally raised Pumpkinhead babies? Babies? How does that even work? Well, guess what? Like everything else that's cool in this episode, it's never explained. Get used to giant plot holes like that scattered all throughout this entire story. While the sister complains on the phone to her BFF, we get a small jump scare where the Pumpkinheads are tapping on her window. Yes, really, these murderous demons who committed kidnappings and trapped children are now reduced to scaring kids by tapping on their back windows. Oh, and apparently the Pumpkinheads can't smash through the glass despite them having enough strength to break other stuff around the farm. Karen checks out the strange noises, but finds nothing. On the roof. How did the Pumpkinheads get on the roof? I mean, I know the previous episode showed us that the Pumpkinheads are stealth masters, but I think all of you would notice these guys climbing on top of your roof. We get a really boring scene where the mother fails to bond with her daughter to give the audience a sense that Karen might get a deep story arc. Spoiler alert, she doesn't. All the scenes between the kids failing to bond with their parents are ultimately meaningless and should have been edited out entirely, especially because nobody cares about these stupid kids and their family problems. We want to see the Pumpkinheads, not emo teens angsting about how much life sucks. You wrote a good first part to this story, Haunting Hour. Why does this sequel exist? However, while the victims are exploring the farm some more, they meet this creepy kid dressed in a skeleton costume, staring ominously at them. The skeleton boy tells them to leave while they still have the chance, otherwise Farmer Palmer's pumpkin children will get them. The kids have no idea what he's talking about, but this kid somehow knows the full details of the Pumpkinheads, despite never being present in the last episode at all, and gives us the recap of the better episode by telling Karen and Zach the tale of Farmer Palmer's evil deeds. He says that a long time ago, Farmer Palmer abducted and murdered countless people to transform them into his baby pumpkin demons as a bizarre family of his. The kid found this out because he reveals that Dave survived the last episode, and he told the police and entire town about how the Pumpkinheads killed his siblings. However, nobody believed him, but some of the townsfolk were wary of Palmer after that event. This strange kid says he believed Dave's story when he started to hear scratches at his window, believing the Pumpkinheads were coming to get him too, which actually makes Karen start to believe him since she heard scratching at her own window earlier. Unfortunately, there is a downside to Mr. Exposition's story here. He also reveals that Farmer Palmer died a long time ago. You heard that right. Farmer Palmer, the main villain of the first episode, and a complex, interesting villain that R.L. Stine created himself, was killed off-screen by reasons unknown. And just like that, I went back to hating this episode with a passion. I mean, how could the show just kill off a villain as dark and interesting as Farmer Palmer? What's funny was that the last episode showed us that he himself was a demon too. Did nobody see Palmer's gigantic demon claw when the police or medics retrieved his dead body? How do you miss the fact that Palmer was a demon? Did the writers also forget that Palmer was not completely human? There had to have been an autopsy or a funeral for him, so people must have noticed that giant demon claw on his arm to confirm Dave's story about demons being real. Oh, but guess what? We're supposed to just ignore that and move on with these much better characters and their family drama. Oh joy, all the great potential the Pumpkinheads had, along with the answers you wanted to hear about these dark creatures and their creator, all died with Farmer Palmer. Because this episode is a generic sequel that doesn't want to build on their story at all and just give us a bland surviving the monsters story. Sorry, Farmer Palmer, but apparently these writers thought you were an uninteresting villain and just killed you off without any second thoughts on all the story potential you had. So after bluntly telling us that a cool Haunting Hour villain died off screen of natural causes, and how this kid did absolutely nothing to stop the pumpkin demons from killing more people, the skeleton boy tells them that the monsters might still be around the area, and they should heed his warnings. The kids don't believe him and tell him to leave, but Karen is suspicious and ponders on what the stranger told her. We cut to the idiot father dressed in Farmer Palmer's suit. Wait, the dad is wearing the clothes of somebody who used to live at this place? Ew. Who just puts on the clothes of a person who used to live in their home? especially when they belong to a creepy old guy who recently died. So our idiot father tries bonding with his stupid son, where he reveals that all the pumpkin crops have died out. Wait, so the soil is now unable to grow any crops? Then why the heck did you idiots move here in the first place? You know, it's never explained why this family just upped and moved to this creepy pumpkin patch at all. We're never given a reason why this family moved here. It doesn't help that the kids are kind of right on how this is a bad change, considering that they act like their parents just brought them to this dead farm area without even letting them know they were moving in the first place. The parents are colossal idiots and piss poor at raising their children, and it doesn't help that they never explain why they wanted to own a pumpkin patch at all. Oh, but don't worry, while the father confirms that the soil can no longer grow regular pumpkins, it can, of course, still grow Pumpkinheads, as we'll all see later. Zach asks his dad about Farmer Palmer, but the dad doesn't know the former owner at all because he tells his son that he actually bought this farm at an auction without looking into the area's history at all. Yes, he is that stupid. The father just bought a place he knew absolutely nothing about on a random whim and expected nothing bad to come of it at all. So because of his idiocy, the family is now stuck owning a collapsing farm with dead soil, no contact with the outside world, accusations of being connected to a well-known serial killer, and now have demons waiting to kill them anytime they want. Why am I supposed to feel sorry for these idiots again?
That's our father. He's an idiot.
So after another failed attempt for the parent to bond with his kid, the Pumpkinheads start their attack by trolling the children. Yes, seriously. We're about to spend the next half hour with the Pumpkinheads hiding in the shadows and trolling the kids by pulling wacky pranks on them, by throwing stuff at them, tapping on their windows, cheap jump scares, and other time-wasting ideas instead of outright killing them all now. However, something unexpected actually happens. The Pumpkinheads get a character trait. One of the monsters spots the idiot father and mistakes him for Farmer Palmer, where we learn that the Pumpkinheads can talk. Oh my gosh, the Pumpkinheads can talk? What does this mean? Well, I'll tell you. It means absolutely nothing. Yeah, they show us that the Pumpkinheads are now able to speak in this episode, despite not talking in the previous story, but guess what? The Pumpkinheads barely speak at all in the rest of the plot. They introduce this surprising characteristic, but the writers never build off of it at all. I mean, really? Really? You show us that the monsters are fully capable of speaking now, giving them a chance to grow as major characters. And what do the writers do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just to rub more salt in the wounds, this scary moment where the Pumpkinheads mistake the idiot father for Farmer Palmer is quickly dropped in the next few seconds and never brought up ever again. I mean, why would any of us want to see how the Pumpkinheads feel about their daddy dying and give them a character arc too? Could you imagine what the monsters must be feeling upon seeing somebody who looks like their long-lost daddy? So after glossing over this unique character moment, we get a cheap jump scare where the mom surprises Karen dressed as a witch, where the episode reminds me what a downgrade the story arc is by having the mom acting more annoying than before.
Did I scare you, my little darling? No, you're that's the spirit.
Oh, I so hope she dies first. The mother tells Karen that they should have a Halloween party to help lift up their spirits, which Karen reluctantly agrees to. But we finally get some good news when a Pumpkinhead finally offs the idiot father when he mistakes the grotesque zombie for his son Zach. Yes, 1 down, 3 to go. The dad dies getting his skull crushed in an obvious kill setup, and the family never hears his screams of agony. We cut back to Zack angsting some more, but we get a very dramatic scene where Zack takes down a scarecrow.
Red 24, red 24, hut, hut! What do I care? That's a yellow pumpkin.
Oh, you're a racist!
All pumpkins are racist. The difference is I admit it.
Later that evening, Zack heads up to his room, but gets jump scared by the scarecrow. He asks Karen if somebody's messing with him, but both she and the mother confirm that they didn't prank him. However, after experiencing all these supernatural occurrences, Zack thinks that it's the skeleton boy pranking them, as he says in a really dumb line.
I'll bet it was him by the junk pile, too, and he must have snuck into my room with that scarecrow. I'm not gonna be punked by a skeleton boy.
Suddenly, the two hear scratching noises outside their door and check it out, where Zack assumes it's the skeleton boy after finding a clue. They decide to go out and solve this mystery once and for all. So I guess nobody cares about where the father disappeared to. He's only their dad after all. While baking snacks, the mother mistakes Pumpkinhead, Scott, and Allie for her children when they corner her, and she fails to notice them closing in to kill her. Meanwhile, a concerned mother approaches the kids, asking where her son Miller is, the skeleton boy, since he went missing in the last couple of hours. Well, I guess that explains why the Pumpkinheads weren't killing these two from the very start. She calls out the kids for living inside of Farmer Palmer's house, saying that he's a monster, confirming all questions they had about Miller's story. However, the mother thinks she spots her own son Miller, but he has something on his head. Yeah, he's a Pumpkinhead now, and he murders his own mother off-screen as we hear her screams of horror. Before the kids can see what's going on, they hear their own mother screaming and rush off to help her. So after some genuinely intense build-up, with them looking around the dark house, they find their parents in the pumpkin patch, now transformed into Pumpkinheads. But they somehow dig them out of the ground, and we see that Pumpkinheads are actually human beings who were buried underneath the cursed soil that magically turns them into Pumpkinhead demons themselves. Wait a minute. The last episode showed us that Farmer Palmer had to cut off people's heads and planted the human heads into the ground while he planted his own pumpkins onto the dead bodies to make his army. But here, they're showing us that all you need to do to make a Pumpkinhead follower is to literally plant a person in the magic soil, even though we clearly saw Scott's head in the ground while a Pumpkinhead was using his body.
Great continuity.
So another reason why I hate this episode is that it screws up everything that made the first episode so great. I mean, you already had to make this Pumpkinhead story arc downgraded to a generic bad sequel, but now you also throw out simple continuity for a cheap plot twist? Well, good job not confusing the audience there. Also, if they really are saying that people need to be planted into the ground first before transforming into Pumpkinheads, then that means Farmer Palmer and his demons stripped Scott and buried him naked while one of the pumpkin monsters wore his outfit. Thanks for that, image writers. So like total morons, the kids dig up their stupid parents and drag them all around the barn to safety because they actually think that they can get to a hospital that knows how to help them out. Okay, I can understand them wanting to save their parents, but kids, they have pumpkins for heads. There is no doctor in the world that can reverse this. While they run around, the Pumpkinheads show up and do what they should have been doing since the first 5 minutes, attempting to kill the family. Oh, but just in case you weren't pissed off that the Pumpkinheads took their sweet time trying to murder them, we get easily the most awful scene in the story, where the chase scene is badly lit and too dark to see in. Yeah, I've seen this episode on multiple formats, from the internet to my TV, and they are all badly lit, as you see in this intense chase scene. Maybe the filmmakers should have had these monsters terrorize them during the daytime, instead of night, where their equipment failed to make everything out well enough for the viewers. They make it to the car, where we get a really stupid moment where Karen apologizes for taking her parents for granted and promises to stop acting like a brat. Because that's what was missing from this scary story about psychotic murderers chopping people's heads off. A lesson about kids learning to appreciate their parents more. I've yelled about this before, but I'll scream it again. Nobody cares about your stupid family drama. I mean, did any of you ever sit down to watch Return of the Pumpkinheads and say to yourself, oh, I hope there's a nice lesson for the families out there in this show where children are brutally murdered? Nobody cares about this girl's character arc. She's a walking target that we know is going to get killed. What's funny is that the episode kind of points out how stupid this is when Zach tells her to stop having her emotional breakdown so they can get the heck out of the death zone. Oh, but he's still an idiot too, since he asks his emotionally fragile sister to drive their getaway car instead of doing it himself. But they're too late, because their parents are evil Pumpkinheads now, because the pumpkin transformation works however the plot demands now, and they close out this episode killing their own children. And that's the end. We did it, everyone. We endured the entire story arc of the Pumpkinheads. How does it hold up? Well, it's really a mixed bag of both good and bad treats. On the one paw, it has a lot of genuinely scary moments that stick out, especially the first episode. It offers so much nightmare fuel for us, but strangely, it never takes the opportunity to grow into a deeper story despite having a sequel. The first Pumpkinheads is a great tale of horror, thanks to being a simple monster story where the kids encounter some supernatural Halloween horrors. The kids in the first episode do have their fair share of idiot moments and overused angst too, but you can still relate with them since they're still just kids who only wanted to have fun on Halloween, only to suffer more than what they bargained for. I'm glad Dave survived and all, but it sucks that the show never had him return, mainly because sequel episodes like Dead Bodies and The Return of Lily D did have major characters come back. Though others might argue that by having Dave survive the first episode, it takes away a lot of the nightmare fuel, since it shows that the Pumpkinheads are not as powerful villains as the story arc wants us to believe. I'm so pissed off that Farmer Palmer was carelessly killed off, since all potential the story had was buried with him in order to tell another generic horror sequel. It would have been so epic if the follow-up episode was a prequel story on how Farmer Palmer started all this, but instead, the show just killed him off without a care for his backstory at all. It's like if the show gave Scary Mary a sequel, but we find out she died a long time ago off screen, and now we're focusing on her slave girls as the main villains. It just doesn't work like that. The kids in Return of the Pumpkinheads are just so unlikable. I honestly don't care about these characters at all because the episode fails to make me care about them, due to 90% of their dialogue being complaints stuck on repeat. The parents are no saints either, since they are straight up morons who you just know are going to die. Heck, the kids probably could have gotten away alive if they dumped their idiot parents and let natural selection run its course. But nope, we had to be given a predictable twist ending where everyone died in the end. I'll give the story arc some credit since it does have a really high death count and some good dark moments, but to see the Pumpkinheads go from an original story to a generic sequel just hurts. The sequel is really not the worst episode, but I dislike it because it's the exact same story we got back on the first one. Return of the Pumpkinheads recycles everything good about the first episode, and everything new they added just made it look bad in comparison. By killing off Farmer Palmer and ignoring simple continuity, it feels like the writers didn't care about carrying on the story and just wanted something smaller than what they could have had. The first story was phenomenal because it was horrifying, unique, intense, disturbing, original, and had realistic characters and interesting monsters. However, Return of the Pumpkinheads is weak, has bad continuity, way too many jump scares, plot holes you could drive a truck through, a predictable plot, absolutely unlikable characters, and worst of all, It's very cliched and unoriginal. You know exactly how the sequel is going to play out if you saw the first one. By having characters you don't care about or you know are doomed to die, there is no reason to stay invested in the story. I know for a fact that the writers have done better than this. Fortunately, the first episode is so good that it reminds you that this was a good story to begin with. However, I'm sorry to tell you this, but the generic bland sequel did cost the story arc the gold, since I'm judging these two episodes together as one. I give the Pumpkinhead story arc a silver skull. The first episode is a genuinely tasty treat of nightmare fuel, but the second part is a sour, stale copycat that pales in comparison to the original. The sequel is honestly not the worst episode I've ever seen, but it did have a lot to live up to, and in my opinion, it failed to achieve that same greatness the first one had. I never thought I had to say this, especially in regards to an R.L. Stine story, but it's not as good as the original. The sequel feels very predictable and by the numbers, while the original had more surprise to it. The Pumpkinheads are cool villains, but they get demoted to extras in their own sequel, robbing us of character development for these amazing antagonists. If you enjoy the sequel, then good for you. It's not as bad as other terrible episodes I've reviewed, but it did not interest me in the slightest, mainly because it's forgettable. Save yourself some time and just watch the first one, because the sequel just repeats everything that made the first one so good. Pumpkinheads is a decent story that will make you dread the things that go bump in the night. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, or just tune in for more videos posted here on Wolf Entertainment. I'm your host, Catastrophe, and I hope you all have a happy Halloween. Hey, wait, where's my jack-o'-lantern?